When we talk about weakness, most of us imagine it as an intrusion into the natural order of our lives, something foreign that interrupts our plans and diminishes our potential. But what if weakness is not accidental? What if weakness, in fact, is deliberately crafted by the hand of God as part of His divine strategy for shaping us? We are quick to interpret strength as a blessing and weakness as a curse, but the witness of Scripture overturns that assumption. God is not embarrassed by your weakness, nor is He surprised by it. He is the author of it, and He designs it with surgical precision to bring about what no amount of earthly strength could ever accomplish. The human instinct is to trust in self-sufficiency. From childhood, we are taught that success depends on our effort, our determination, our willpower. We live in cultures that glorify the strong, the resilient. We measure worth by independence and achievement. And so, naturally, when weakness appears, whether in the form of sickness, limitation, failure, or even deep emotional struggle, we recoil. We treat it as something to be solved quickly, hidden from view, or overcome by sheer determination. Yet God, in His wisdom, is doing the exact opposite. He is not hastening to remove your weakness, because it is His tool to dismantle a far greater problem, your pride and your illusion of control. Consider the psychology of pride for a moment. Pride does not always manifest as arrogance or boasting. More often, it takes the quieter form of self-reliance. We believe we can manage life, navigate relationships, overcome temptation, and carve out meaning by our own strength. We may not say this out loud, but it's buried deep in our hearts. Weakness exposes the fragility of that assumption. It tears down the illusion that we are in control. Suddenly, the confident man is shaken by anxiety. The healthy woman is slowed by illness. The successful professional loses everything in a moment. In that stripping away, something profound happens. God reminds us that we were never the source of our own stability. Philosophically, weakness functions like a mirror. It reveals not only who we are, but who we are not. When you face your limitations, you are confronted with the truth that you are finite, dependent, and fragile. And that confrontation is not cruelty, it is grace. Because until we see our poverty, we will never seek the riches of Christ. Until we experience the collapse of our own resources, we will never cry out for His. Weakness, therefore, is not an accident of existence, but a deliberate design to bring us to the end of ourselves so that we may finally discover Him. Think of the Apostle Paul, who pleaded with God to remove his thorn. He was not asking for something unreasonable. He believed, as most of us would, that without the thorn he could be more effective, more fruitful, more useful in ministry. But God's answer was striking. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Notice what God does there. He reframes the entire meaning of weakness. To Paul, the thorn was an obstacle. To God, the thorn was a channel. It was the very place where his strength would be revealed most clearly. And Paul came to understand that what felt like hindrance was actually the pathway to deeper communion with Christ. On a psychological level, this transforms the way we process struggle. Instead of resenting weakness, we begin to recognize its purpose. Instead of suppressing it or pretending it does not exist, we bring it into the light of God's presence and allow Him to use it. Weakness humbles us, but it also frees us. It frees us from the exhausting burden of pretending we are stronger than we are. It frees us from the tyranny of self-dependence, and it frees us to rest in the truth that God's love does not require our strength to be effective. In fact, it is magnified precisely in our frailty. There is also something deeply humanizing about weakness. It levels us. It strips away the masks of superiority and the false categories by which we judge one another. Weakness makes us compassionate because it reminds us that we are all fragile beings in need of mercy. It teaches us to extend grace to others, not from a posture of condescension, but from the shared recognition that we are equally dependent on God. So when you look at the weaknesses in your life, the ones you hide, the ones you resent, the ones that keep you awake at night, understand this: they are not there by accident. They are there by design. God is not punishing you when He creates weakness. He is saving you. Saving you from the delusion that you can sustain yourself. Saving you from the pride that blinds you to your need. Saving you from a shallow life built on the illusion of independence. And so, the next time you find yourself asking, why this weakness? Why this limitation? Remember the deeper reality. God is not simply allowing weakness. He is creating it, shaping it, using it for a higher purpose. Weakness is the chisel with which He sculpts your soul. And if you have the courage to embrace it, you will find that what you thought was breaking you was in fact remaking you. The weakness you despise may be the very place where God intends to show you His strength. Dasik, we live in a world that praises strength. Everything in our culture tells us that value is measured by how competent, capable, and successful we appear. From the classroom to the workplace, from our friendships to our ambitions, we are taught to believe that strength is the currency of worth. And because of this, we often hide our weaknesses, bury our failures, and build facades that project stability and confidence. But what if the strength we rely on is nothing more than an illusion? What if the very things we trust in to make us secure are the same things that God allows weakness to expose and dismantle? The truth is that human strength, apart from God, is fragile. It feels real while it lasts, but it cannot endure. Think of how quickly health can be taken away, how fast a career can collapse, how suddenly a reputation can be destroyed. One moment, a person stands tall in confidence, and the next, life reduces them to the ground. Weakness functions like a piercing light that breaks through the illusions of strength we cling to. It shows us that what we thought was unshakable is in fact dust. It tears away the shallow securities we use to prop up our lives and forces us to face the uncomfortable truth: we are not as strong as we think we are. Psychologically, this is unsettling because human beings crave control. We want to believe that if we just try hard enough, prepare well enough, and discipline ourselves consistently, we can master life. Weakness disrupts that narrative. It invades our sense of stability and reveals that our control was only imagined. And here lies the paradox: what feels like loss is actually grace. God allows weakness to shatter the illusion of our self-made strength so that we can see the foundation we have been building upon. And more importantly, so we can abandon it for something far greater. There is a philosophical depth here as well. For centuries, thinkers have debated the nature of strength and weakness. The world glorifies the powerful, but Scripture reveals that strength without God is no strength at all. It is simply a mask, a temporary performance that hides the truth of human fragility. Weakness exposes that mask. It forces us to reckon with our dependence. And though our pride resists this reality, our souls long for it. Because deep down, we know we were never designed to be self-sufficient. We were created to lean upon something greater, to find our sufficiency not in ourselves but in the one who made us. Think of the countless ways this plays out in life. A man builds his identity on his career only to lose his job and spiral into despair. A woman rests her confidence in beauty or health, only to find time and illness strip them away. A student builds worth on grades, only to discover that even success feels hollow. In each case, weakness is not merely failure, it is revelation. It reveals that the strength we thought could sustain us was incapable of carrying the weight of our existence. And it is precisely there, in that painful unveiling, that God does His work. The Apostle Paul understood this deeply. In Philippians, he described all his human achievements, his lineage, his learning, his discipline, as loss compared to knowing Christ. He saw that what once appeared as strength was actually worthless when weighed against the surpassing value of God's presence. Weakness exposed the illusion of strength, and in that exposure, Paul discovered the freedom of resting in a power beyond his own. For us, this means weakness is not the enemy. It is the unveiling of truth. It unmasks the idols we build: success, reputation, intellect, independence, and shows us that they cannot save. And though that exposure feels like death, it is in fact the beginning of life. Because when the illusion of strength is shattered, the invitation of God becomes clear to abandon the fragile foundations of self and to rest in the eternal strength that cannot be shaken. On a practical level, this changes how we see ourselves and others. When we recognize that much of what passes for strength in our culture is illusion, we no longer envy those who seem untouchable, nor do we despise our own weakness. Instead, we learn to view life with honesty. We begin to measure worth not by outward strength, but by the presence of God's sustaining grace. And in doing so, we are liberated from the exhausting pursuit of appearances. Weakness becomes the teacher that reminds us who we are and who we are not, and who God alone can be for us. So the next time weakness exposes the illusion of your strength, resist the urge to cover it up or to pretend it is not there. See it for what it is, a gift of God's mercy. For in that painful unveiling, He is rescuing you from the lie of self-sufficiency and leading you to a greater reality. Weakness is not the end of your strength, it is the end of your illusion. And when the illusion is gone, only truth remains, and in that truth, God's strength shines all the brighter. The paradox of the Christian life is that God chooses weakness as the very channel through which His strength flows. This is not a poetic idea or a comforting phrase to soothe us in hardship. It is a profound spiritual reality that confronts the way we understand power. We imagine that God's grace is an addition to our ability, something that fills in the gaps when we fall short. But grace is not a supplement. It is not God saying, "Do your best and I'll cover the rest." Grace is a replacement. It takes the place of our strength entirely, because the truth is, no matter how strong we appear, we have nothing in ourselves that can accomplish the work of God. Weakness is not the barrier to grace. It is the very doorway through which grace enters. When Paul wrote that God's power is made perfect in weakness, he was not using poetic exaggeration. He was describing the very essence of how God works with His people. Notice, God did not say, "My power is present in your strength." He said, "My power is perfected in your weakness." That means the very condition we most fear, the one we try hardest to avoid, is the precise condition where God delights to display His sufficiency. Weakness does not hinder Him, it reveals Him. On a psychological level, This transforms the way we think about failure and limitation. Normally, when we hit the limits of our endurance, our instinct is to feel shame. We assume that if we were stronger, wiser, or more disciplined, we wouldn't be facing this difficulty. But God is not ashamed of weakness. He uses it to draw us closer to Himself. Think of it this way: weakness is like a crack in the armor of human pride. Through that crack, the light of divine strength can finally shine. It is only when we are emptied of our illusions that we are ready to be filled with His reality. Philosophically, this flips the very meaning of strength on its head. Human definitions of strength revolve around autonomy, being independent, self-sufficient, unshaken by circumstance. But God defines strength as dependency, leaning fully on Him, resting in His sufficiency, allowing His Spirit to do what our flesh cannot. This is why weakness becomes indispensable. Without it, we cling to the myth of autonomy. With it, we are forced into the posture of dependence that allows God's strength to flow. Think of a vessel. A vessel that is full of itself has no room for anything else. But an empty vessel, one that has been poured out, is precisely the one that can be filled. Weakness, in this sense, is the pouring out of self so that the fullness of God can take its place. It is not that God strengthens us to accomplish our will. He replaces our will with His, and His strength becomes the defining power of our lives. You see this in the lives of countless men and women of faith. Moses, stammering and reluctant, was chosen to confront Pharaoh. Gideon, hiding in fear, was called to lead an army. Peter, impulsive and cowardly, was entrusted with shepherding the early church. Each of them displayed obvious weakness. And yet in those very weaknesses, the glory of God was revealed. Their stories are not tales of human triumph, but of divine sufficiency breaking through fragile vessels. This also reshapes how we think about spiritual growth. Too often we imagine growth as becoming stronger in ourselves, as if maturity means we eventually need less of God. But the reality is the opposite. True growth means we see more clearly our dependence, we feel more deeply our inadequacy, and we rest more fully in His strength. Maturity does not reduce weakness, it increases awareness of it. And in that awareness, grace becomes not a one-time gift, but a constant supply. On a practical level, this challenges us to live differently. Instead of hiding our weaknesses, we can confess them openly before God. Instead of resenting them, we can ask what He might be teaching us through them. And instead of trying to build an identity on our strengths, we can ground our identity in His grace. This frees us not only from pride, but also from despair. Pride says, I don't need God. Despair says, I'm too broken for God to use. Grace says, your weakness is the very place I will reveal my strength. So when you face the reality of your own limitations, when you feel like you've reached the end of yourself, do not despise that place. For it may be the holiest ground you will ever stand on. That place of emptiness is the very threshold of God's sufficiency. Weakness does not disqualify you. It prepares you. It does not push God away. It draws Him near. The cracks in your life are not the places where God abandons you. They are the very places where His power breaks through. Weakness, in the end, does more than humble us or strip away illusions. It changes the way we see everything. It shifts our gaze from the temporary to the eternal. When you are strong, when life is comfortable, when all your plans seem to unfold according to your will, the temptation is to settle into the illusion that this world is enough. You begin to believe that security is found in health, that joy is found in possessions, that meaning is found in accomplishment. But when weakness enters, when the very things you leaned upon begin to fail, you are confronted with the truth. This life is fleeting, fragile, and ultimately insufficient to satisfy the soul. Weakness forces us to lift our eyes beyond what is seen, to anchor ourselves in what cannot be shaken. This is why Paul could say that his afflictions, though painful, were light and momentary compared with the eternal weight of glory. It is not that the suffering was trivial. Paul endured beatings, imprisonments, betrayals, and constant danger. But weakness changed his perspective. It taught him to measure life not by the span of years on this earth, but by the eternal realities of God's kingdom. He saw that weakness, rather than destroying him, was preparing his soul for a glory that would outlast the decay of the body and the collapse of worldly comforts. Philosophically, weakness operates as a tutor, guiding the human mind toward what truly endures. If we never encountered limitation, we would mistake the temporary for the eternal. We would spend our lives chasing shadows, mistaking them for substance. Weakness breaks that cycle. It reveals the fragility of everything under the sun and awakens the heart to long for something beyond the sun. It presses upon us the question, if everything I lean on can collapse, then what remains? And in asking that question, we are invited to discover the one foundation that cannot be moved, the eternal God and His promises. Psychologically, this perspective is liberating. When weakness strips away illusions, it can feel like loss at first, but in reality, it is a kind of freedom. You no longer have to cling desperately to things that cannot last. You no longer have to build your identity on achievements, health, or status because you know they can vanish in a moment. Instead, Your mind is freed to rest on the only reality that cannot be taken away, the love and presence of God. Weakness, then, does not only humble you, it reorients your desires. It teaches you to value what truly matters, to seek first the kingdom of God rather than the applause of men. Think of how different life becomes under this perspective. The man who once built his worth on wealth discovers, through weakness, that riches can evaporate overnight. But instead of despair, he learns to store treasure in heaven. The woman who once found identity in beauty or acclaim discovers, through weakness, that time and circumstance will strip those away. But instead of bitterness, she learns to rest her identity in the unchanging love of Christ. The believer who once lived for temporary goals discovers, through weakness, that eternity is what counts. And suddenly every action, every word, every sacrifice takes on eternal significance. Weakness also sharpens our faith. Faith at its core is the ability to trust in what is unseen. As long as life is easy, faith risks becoming theoretical, a concept we affirm but do not actually depend on. But weakness makes faith necessary. It forces us to live not by sight but by trust. It reminds us that this world is not our home, that our citizenship is in heaven, and that our hope must rest on promises we cannot yet see. And in this way, weakness deepens faith, not because it makes life easier, but because it makes God indispensable. This is why so many of God's people, when looking back on seasons of weakness, speak of them not as wasted years, but as sacred years. The very struggles they once begged God to remove became the furnace where eternal perspective was forged. Weakness drew their eyes away from fleeting pleasures and fastened them on eternal joy. Weakness, far from diminishing life, enlarged it, teaching them to live not for the moment, but for the glory of God that stretches beyond all moments. So when you face weakness, do not think of it merely as a burden. See it as an invitation to look higher, to look deeper, to look beyond the immediate. Your weakness is not simply exposing what you lack, it is shaping what you long for. It is redirecting your gaze from the fragile comforts of this world to the unshakable hope of eternity. And in that redirection lies freedom. The weakness that makes this world feel small is the very thing that opens your heart to the vastness of eternity. So do not waste it by clinging to shadows when God is calling you to the substance of Himself.